and a blessing on the preaching and the hearing of this word. I did warn my daughters that they are in the sermon. Pastor's prerogative. And 14 years ago, come August, life changed for me. Life changed for me and for my husband, Bill, actually. Like a change with a gigantic, emboldened C and lots of punctuation following. They're hiding in their little chairs back here, but Abby and Tess are twins. If you didn't know that, they are twins. And they were born on the evening of August 11th, 2004. Now, actually I see some other parents of twins out there. We, Bill and I, informed each set of our parents that we wanted the first 2 weeks with these babies alone. And that, now that we reflect back, was very foolish. Very foolish. After our grueling 2 weeks, at wit's end, my in-laws came to town. It was like the cavalry was coming to rescue us, and we handed them a baby each. And then we took ourselves off for the first 4 hours of uninterrupted sleep since arriving home from the hospital. I've never experienced any kind of, and I've run marathons, nothing compares to 2 weeks with infants, I tell you. So, a member of the church I was serving at the time reminded me, this was their advice, God gives us children to remind us we are not in control. And that is sage advice, to be sure. So, although these are no longer babies, because 20 months later we decided to have another one, and now we have a new normal, no longer, well, I imagine we'll have some sleepless nights yet, but these tweens and teens can tie their shoes, they can bake cupcakes, we can go shopping alone without appendages. But life is not the same. We had to reorient ourselves. We had to rethink a lot of things with children coming into our lives. And they've been a gift. It's true, yes, they have been, but it's a gift that has destabilized most of what previously ordered our very quiet life. I'm sure those of you who have children, those of you who are grandparents, those of you who have had change, and now that would be every single one of you, understands the tumult that change brings to our life, right? That things change, and then we have to readjust. Now, we hear that God's grace works through all of these times, but this morning, I want to highlight that God's grace works most especially in disorienting moments. Sometimes the disorienting moment itself is an act of God's mercy and grace. The Trinity is a complicated concept, and I'm not even going to swim into those waters because I don't quite understand it myself, except that there are multiple ways we understand God and how God works, blows through our lives, and the ways in which we relate, whether it be in relationship with people or in relationship with our higher power. Those things remain mysterious, but we have all kinds of access to God in different shapes and forms. In the Gospel of John this morning, we hear of Nicodemus. We've heard about Nicodemus in the Lent season. Nicodemus is back. In the very same story, Nicodemus has come to Jesus in the cover of night. Now, one thing I found just since preaching last night I've always thought that maybe Nicodemus visited Jesus because he didn't want anyone to know where he was going to see this teacher that was a bit of a rabble-rouser. What I've learned, for the Pharisees, which Nicodemus was one, most of your studying, most of the time you dwelled in the text that brought you insight and understanding of God was done at night because you were doing other things in the day. So what Nicodemus may have been doing is taking his study time at night and going to open another book for increased knowledge by visiting Jesus. He comes with a laundry list of questions, doesn't he? He wants to know things, and Jesus is elusive. He switches the subject on Nicodemus. He plays with words. He goes into unexpected topics and directions, and Nicodemus strives to keep up as a good student and teacher himself would, but then Jesus kind of launches into a monologue. Jesus is not trying to accommodate Nicodemus's wanting information and answers. Jesus is trying to unsettle him with a complete shift of a way of thinking about God. Nicodemus becomes the student. Jesus' word disorients Nicodemus's understanding of his place in the kingdom. Nicodemus has, to some extent, been secure as a person of Jewish descent. And Jesus says, in the new kingdom that I preach about, that's not what gives you your foundation. Water, spirit, they will serve as the birthmarks of those who belong to this new family. And so while Jesus is calling Nicodemus to be born again, let's also remember he's asking Nicodemus to risk. Maybe not just position and security, but maybe his very life. Because the people with whom Nicodemus hangs out, that would be my daughter. The people with whom Nicodemus hangs out, they're seeking Jesus' life. When he says, Jesus, to Nicodemus, you must be born again, he's asking Nicodemus to become a part of the persecuted minority that orders its life by a belief that God's love is for the whole world, and that in the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus, everyone will be included. Kind of the y'all, right? If you're from the South, you all, y'all. Nicodemus is knocked off balance by Jesus' words. He says, how can these things be? But his disorientation is a part of his conversion too, the beginning, the one that eventually leads Nicodemus to speak up for Jesus as his peers and his partners put Jesus on trial. And finally, later in John, to minister to Jesus at the tomb, to take spices and herbs with Joseph of Arimathea and prepare Jesus' body for burial. Now, Nicodemus does not know this at the time, but as he goes through this conversion conversation with Jesus, he's taking his first steps to a new, disoriented, and abundant life. St. John is a bit in that position right now. You've been capably, ably, thoughtfully, prayerfully, lovingly pastored the last 13 years. Pastor David and Pastor Dom have accompanied you on your journey of faith. But the promise is never that they will be with you forever, right? The promise is that they walk with you faithfully during a time, and then someone else comes to walk with you faithfully during the next time. But it feels disruptive and disorienting, and it feels sad and bittersweet, doesn't it? And so let's take the case and the story of Nicodemus to help us in this time. Without shifting, we can't grow. Without sometimes being moved from one spot to another where maybe the soil is a bit different or the lighting a bit more or less, sometimes it takes a bit of a shift to grow. And then how do we respond to that interruption that God places in our lives? Do we resist the change and desperately retain the status quo? Or do we allow this gift of disorientation and shifting help reorient us? Maybe in our weariness, we're with Nicodemus, or a tired new parent that says, how can this be? These bundles of joy that cause me great anxiety. Maybe it's the triune God that visits us as a spirit, as a person, as a thunderous voice, revealing at precisely this time the ways in which we can grow in grace and minister in strength and partner in faith on this journey that God has for us and is waiting for us to embrace always with all our strength. I know we're up to the task, and I know that all of you will be faithful in the walk. Amen.